With us today, we have Dr. Andrew Kuninobu, who is one of the physicians here with us at the New Start program. And Dr. Kuninobu, something we want to talk about today is the first T in New Start. It stands for the word temperance, a word that maybe some of us are not really familiar with or haven't heard too often. I'm wondering if maybe you could define that word for us.
Sure. I mean, it's a very interesting word, and a lot of people today probably misunderstand it because the modern usage, or the way people tend to use it today, is just moderation in all things. That's kind of the typical way that people look at it. But historically, temperance actually was tied to prohibition and the temperance movement back in the 19th century, which was all about complete abstinence from alcohol. And so the pendulum kind of swung on the usage in America from that to where it is today, where it's moderation in all things. But in actuality, it has to do with complete avoidance of things that are bad, kind of harping back to the 19th century definition, but the moderation part being moderate in things that are good for us. But unfortunately, people have kind of melded it and said, well, moderation in all things, so that's okay to be moderate in, alcohol, or moderate in drugs, or moderate in, and we all would recognize that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in actuality. I mean, would I say, moderate use of arsenic is fine?
Maybe not, yeah.
Maybe not so
it
much.
Certainly lead to something that is quite final.
That's right.
So that leads me to my next question. It almost seems like the opposite of temperance then would be something like perhaps addiction. And is there maybe a term that you could, or a definition you could give us for the term addiction?
Yeah, sure. Addiction there's a number of different definitions out there. Classic addiction usually involves things like compulsion, and there's a concept of tolerance buildup. For example, using drugs, for example, let's say heroin or something like that, where somebody may start off using a certain amount and then there's a tolerance buildup, and they're compulsed. They have this compulsion or drive to continue to do so. They become dependent upon it. And they find that if they are away from it, even if they get away from it for a while, they tend to relapse easily. And they do all of this despite the harmful effects, either on themselves or on society, family members, or somebody else like that.
So it seems that addiction is more of an issue in the mind, but it has quite a significant effect on the body, which is something that we've been covering here at New Start. So what is kind of the science behind that, of addiction in the mind?
Well, I alluded to it with the tolerance part of it, and definitely has a lot to do with the mind, but it has to do with brain chemistry.
Really?
So it is actually having to do with the body, but in a different sense, in that there are actually chemical changes that take place in the brain. And they recognize now that most things that can be termed addictions, whether it be a substance or a behavior even, such as addiction to media, a common pathways ends up being right in the limbic system where dopamine is involved, and the dopamine system and the reward system. And it's very interesting that there's a lot of biochemical common pathways that are involved in that.
Wow, so it's really something that's affecting our bodies, but it's starting in our minds and has a large degree to do with the chemistry of our minds. So what can you do for maybe patients that are coming to you that have these addictive problems, that are having perhaps negative effects on their physical health, but it's really a mental problem? Is there something that can be done for their physical health to help their mental health, or vice versa?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, first of all, the number one thing is that a lot of people think, well, I know that whatever it is, fill in the blank, is bad for me, but I'm just going to kind of taper down. Again, they throw in that concept of moderation, and that just doesn't work. In actuality, based on the chemistry and everything, the best thing actually to do is complete abstinence, complete stopping. Because unless you do that, you continue to feed those same pathways, and it's very, very difficult to get the brain to heal. I didn't even mention some of the things that happen, for example, to drug addicts, that it affects not just that system, but it affects the frontal lobe and able to make decisions, etc. And in order for that to heal, there has to be complete abstinence. And it goes for many of the different things that we get addicted to.
So you talked about drug addiction, for example, but addiction is even something perhaps that could affect us in a way that would be more subtle, that we wouldn't normally term addiction, like perchance in the foods that we eat.
Sure.
Or just other various behaviors that we might have that have a negative effect on our body. What are some things that you can tell people to maybe help them to prevent going into these addictive behaviors or forming these bad habits?
Sure. Well, one is understanding the definition. So often we fall back to the world's definitions of things like moderation in all things. So we think, oh, it'll be fine if I just, have some of this, and then we know it's not the healthiest thing, but then it leads to a little bit more and a little bit more. So understanding that concept and truly avoiding the things that are bad. But keeping the whole body and mind healthy involves actually all the different elements of New Start. Eating healthfully to begin with helps avoidance of getting into certain things, obviously, but drinking lots of water, getting our exercise, getting our rest or our sleep, this, well-balanced life in all these different aspects helps us with prevention as well as treatment of addiction.
So kind of being moderate in all the different aspects of health rather than just honing in on one, but taking it all together can really help us to have that comprehensive health and the self-control maybe to turn away from things that would be negative for our bodies and cause addictions and whatnot. Well, thank you, Dr. Kuninobu. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about temperance and help us to understand more of what this term means, and I hope we can implement these principles that you've shared with us.